The number 4 top story this week is Josh doesn't know where Bitcoin gets its value. This is from Scoresby, February 6th, Bitcoin territory, 41 comments, 5,872 sats. Keyan, who's Josh?
Josh Levine, I believe, is an economist, at least writes online. Someone shared a story that he wrote. I think this is the wrong link, and Scoresby shares in a pinned comment the right one. But he wrote about basically this philosophical problem that many people have with Bitcoin. For instance, Elvis Mercury and I have had a discussion about this before, but basically most monies, we can trace them back to a point where they weren't treated as money, but they had intrinsic value. And so that's kind of what Josh is writing about, is that Bitcoin doesn't have that like base case. It doesn't have that starting point where it starts with intrinsic value and then bootstraps monetary value. And so he's trying to. He has a hard time appreciating Bitcoin because he can't find what that thing is. And I've had this same discussion with Elvis Mercury. Elvis Mercury calls it, I think, a grounding problem. It's more philosophical language. But like, what preceded Bitcoin having monetary value? What value preceded Bitcoin having monetary value? And it's not intrinsic value because Bitcoin is digital. So what is it? And so Scoresby kind of unpacks Josh's complaints and links to some relevant economic theory. I think they call this the regression theorem, or the Miesian regression theorem is what they end up calling it. I can't scroll, but because Mises had this problem, and he just describes how a commodity gets money by tracing it back to the point where it wasn't money. And then he also references Voskuil's interpretation of this, is where you can actually, like, where did, like, the determination that something, that even a commodity had utility, was subjective. And so you can now maybe perform regression on that as well, and keep going through regressions and end up at the same problem even with the commodity money, is Voskuil's argument. Anyway, it's just a interesting thing to think about, because I don't think anyone has a really great answer and has really figured this out. And Scoresby ends by citing some of the, I think it was Hal, or maybe it was Satoshi on the old Bitcoin Talk forums, but says that maybe Bitcoin's value bootstraps from just the collectability of having a UTXO. Early, like maybe it has a variety of these kind of base cases, or these groundings, and then from there it bootstraps monetary value. And
Awesome.
Anyway, just
what do you think, Austin?
Well, if we're staying philosophical, there's this philosophical idea called Agrippa's trilemma. Have you ever heard of it, Keyan?
I've heard of it. I don't know what it is, though.
And so it's this idea that, like, any why question that you follow ends in one of 3 places. And these 3 places are either infinite regression, circular reasoning, which is like the chicken because the egg because the chicken, or an axiom, which is to say just a foundational dogma that you must accept. And I feel like this falls into that category.
Yep.
As they were talking about regression, because it's like, well, maybe I would say Bitcoin's intrinsic value is that I don't need to trust a third party, and that value was interpretable, apparent from day 0 as soon as I discovered it. But then you could regress that, like, well, what is that value really? That value to not trust, and that's really actually this other thing that's deeper. And it's like, okay, we could follow that all the way down, but we're not going to get anywhere, right? Because we're going to end up in an axiom that you don't accept, or a series of reasoning and questions that don't have an end.
Okay, so it sounds like you're probably agreeing with Voskuil, where there actually is no satisfactory answer to this question. And so for gold, you would say, because someone might say, gold satisfies the regression here. It has a sufficient base case, a sufficient grounding, in that it was decorative. It was seen as being pretty initially and was used as jewelry. But you're saying that, like Voskuil, you're saying that could regress further. Like the axiom you're accepting, I guess, and maybe you're accepting an axiom there, which is where human beings find glittery, malleable metals that are rare, valuable.
Mm-hmm. I guess the axiom I'm accepting is like, yeah, the Austrian axiom of like that value comes from individuals and expressed through human action. And there's like a similar idea I've heard that like, okay, so there's the idea of the rational economic actor in economics, and it's this way to do sense making about how people should act given their incentives. But of course, we know that's retarded. And actually, the idea that I've heard is that if for you to fully understand my decision, let's say to move to Austin, you would not only have to like understand my whole life. You would, because basically in the answer to the reason why did Austin move to Austin is the whole entire universe. You would have to reconstruct the whole entire universe to get a perfect 100% answer to that question. And so the axiom there is individualism, and is that it just emerges out of what I did.
I think what you're saying, and at least what I can gather, it sounds like you guys are both saying that it comes at creation. Like why does Bitcoin have value? It's because it comes at creation. And so when I think about that, I think of like, okay, the internet became a thing and it became very popular. Therefore, it needed some sort of money that we could transact with. And so maybe what you're getting at is maybe just the creation of Austin coming, the creation of Austin being created led to him coming to Austin. And so I'm curious. I think overall, I think you're both right, but I think Austin's right about the whole axiom thing. I think that's just like dead on. But I would wonder, and I haven't done any research, just like riffing here, but I would wonder if there's been anything else at creation that then created something that had value. And I would probably go back to like the Gutenberg press or something like that. That books became valuable then. Because, I mean, unless we're just strictly talking about money.
I think we're mostly talking about money because it is fairly simple. It doesn't have much utility outside of serving its function as money, especially for Bitcoin. It strictly serves the utility of money and doesn't have, I can't learn by holding Bitcoin in my hardware wallet without other things. But a book, I get utility from it because I can read with it, I can burn it on a fire. So that's where they differ a bit. But it sounds like you agree to some. If you go back to creation, that is an infinite regress, because like if we go back to Austin's creation, then we have to go back to the creation of Austin's parents, and then we have to go. So that is infinite regress. I get the sense that there's probably a more like a satisfactory answer to this, at least something a little more axiomatic looking and less infinite regress looking, something more like the origin story of gold as money. But I don't know what that is. Maybe Satoshi left us a hint in that it has a more diverse.
I feel like a lot of it's already
value.
been explained for the most part, right, through the Bitcoin standard. I mean, we're talking about proof of work. We're talking about a very intricate system here.
And it's like
know.
the very framing of intrinsic value is like, I know that it's like a midwit thing to pick at that, but
it is
like it really is true. It's like, says who? Like that's what I want to say when someone's like, well, Bitcoin doesn't have intrinsic, and intrinsic to who? and once again, this goes back to the infinite regress, because it's like, well, is there an authority? And then you realize there's not, and it's like we're all the authority. So it's like kind of like none of us, but all of us at the same time.
That's
which
why I
is
like
this
the axiom thing. I like the axiom thing because some things just don't need explanation.
But you need to point out the axiom. But an axiom is like we can establish the axiom. I mean, I get that this is like it's pointless at this point. Bitcoin has value, whatever. And we could just say no one needs to think about this. But this is for someone who likes intellectual puzzles. That's what they're trying to figure out. It's like how does this, like other things that I've seen, that play a role as money. How can I tell a story, a coherent story about money, and Bitcoin fits into it?
Well,
from the very
I mean, if you go back to gold, right? Like, what was it about gold that made everybody want to use it?
It was, I mean, the theory goes that it was valued as jewelry, and then eventually people started exchanging it, and then they realized it facilitates exchange very well, and it also stores very well, and it has all these properties of money that we like, but the value originated at something that wasn't its monetary value, that was outside of its monetary value, which was that it had this decorative value. And so what is Bitcoin's non-monetary value? Its original value before it had, because it didn't have monetary value to begin with. It wasn't even censorship resistant. It wasn't even even without a third party, because
wouldn't you call that the programming aspects of it? Because that's kind of like this day and age's jewelry. Like, what have you? Like, it's creation. It's still creation to a certain extent. Like, you guys are building on the protocol. So it's kind of similar to wearing it. It's like similar to wearing it. I mean, it's constant iteration of everything. So I don't know. Something like that makes more sense in my head, but I don't really think about this stuff too often.
It's a fun puzzle, though, because it's funny how quickly you end up in infinite regression. Because if someone is honestly like, why is Bitcoin valuable? I'd be like, well, it's valuable because, a lot of people decide it's valuable. And a lot of people decide it's valuable because, they value money they don't have to trust, and they value money they don't have to trust. And then, like, I rebuild the history of money for them. And then it's like, well, why, like, even, like, this money thing? Like, maybe we could have another way. And I'm like, well, you see, you need money because division of labor. And then you're, like, in this whole...
Yeah.
You rebuild the whole universe.
Yeah, you'd really like to not have to do that and have an axiom that you stop at, where you have a bookend for it, where you don't have to regress back to telling people about the spin of atoms at the beginning of the universe.
I feel like this is where Vake is going to go stay in your lane. And the first time I actually agree.
Yeah.
Because, like, I think the pontification of stuff like this is best left to the
philosophers.
To the philosophers in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think it's fun, and I think there is probably a pretty axiomatic answer that you can arrive at.
My axiomatic answer, yes.
All right.